Good morning. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. My name is Marilyn Orr, President of the club, and we are thrilled to have you join us today. This meeting broadcast is available on HCTV, as well as our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel and Facebook. Our club meets weekly using this digital platform, Zoom. When we meet in person, it's at Laurel Lake Retirement Community for breakfast. We hope to get back to that soon. We meet most Wednesday mornings from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. So come out to join us for a meeting. We would love to have you as a guest. To learn more about Rotary, our club, and the impact we are having on our local community and the world, please visit our website, rotaryhudson.org. So enjoy this meeting today and help us share the message that Rotary opens doors of opportunity.
And we're ready. Ready to go.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Bill Woolridge.
And I think I am now unmuted. Good morning, Rotarians. And let's bow our heads in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask your understanding and guidance in this difficult time for our city and our country. We are experiencing hurt and difficulty in understanding each other, especially across racial and ethnic lines. We need help in listening better and opening our hearts and minds to each other. Please help us, especially to soften our hearts so that we may reach out to our fellow citizens. We ask this in your name as our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Bill. And now to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test, Evan McCall.
Good morning, Rotarians. If you'll join me in the pledge, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the four-way test, number one, is it the truth? Number two, is it fair to all concerned? Number three, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number four, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, Evan. And now our president, Marilyn Orr.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. We have just a bit of business before we start our program. The Hudson Rotary Club Board of Directors will be meeting immediately following this meeting. All active Rotarians are invited to attend. It is anticipated that the meeting should last until approximately 9:30 this morning. This Friday, the Gala Committee will be meeting at 8 a.m. Last Saturday, we had a great turnout, putting in a volunteer morning cleaning the swimming pool area at Camp Manitowoc, getting it ready for an active summer of Scout swimming. Rich Warfield and Patrick Shear had plenty of jobs to keep us occupied, and thank you to Ed Sogan, Terry Bortnick, Patricia Getz, Bill McClure, Joe Avila, Joe Rusnak. I mean, really, former Rotarians show up for this thing, Jay Yard and myself. And we were done by 11 o'clock in the morning. And the Scouts fed us burgers and hot dogs with sides and chocolate chunk cookies the size of hubcaps. I'm very pleased this morning to introduce our newest Rotarian, Dr. Patricia Getz. She stepped right up by joining in the Scout Camp cleanup and has accepted a Rotary assignment to work with other leaders in our district as our representative to the board of the Northeast Ohio Gift of Life. She has experience with medical missions, and it's such an honor to have her join our club. But right now, I'm going to let John Adams help us all get to know her better. Patricia is the 6th new member of our club this year. Given the pandemic and the move to Zoom, only contacts this year, I'll tell you, I was a little worried at the beginning of the year about the growth of our club. But there's work to do and leadership roles to take. And this has actually turned out to be a pretty good year. John, take it away, please. Let's learn more about Patricia. Patricia, unmute as well.
Thank you and good morning, Rotarians. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our newest member, Dr. Patricia Getz, to our group this morning. I did look over her application and I have some background information, and I thought we'd start really just commending some things that stood out to me. So she's a medical doctor, a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. She's been in Hudson now for 16 years, so she's seen some things. She was on the board of the Coalition for Children's Mental Health in Hudson and served as the president. She's also a member of the Western Reserve Community Band, currently serving as the secretary. And she also was on the Portage County Mental Health and Recovery Board in the past. So she has literally spent her career as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, helping families and children, certainly an important part of our community and the community at large. So first, I would like to ask, certainly a physician, a psychiatrist, married and 3 children at one time. You really, you're a doer. You are a doer. So what was it about that area of medicine that attracted you?
Well, I loved working with children and I loved pediatrics. But I hated it when you walked in the room and they yelled at you when you were ready to put needles in them. And I really enjoyed talking to them more. When I was in my 4th year of medical school, I really toyed with neonatology because the premature infants don't yell at you.
Right.
But
the parents might, but no.
Yeah, but I decided that I really enjoyed working with the kids. And my first job was at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. And so it was a nice combination of the medical part and the psychiatric part, working with kids with seizures and diabetes and all of that. And then I thought it would be a better job because I wanted to have children. My children tell me no, they wish I wasn't a psychiatrist, but anyway, what can you do? Yeah.
Now it's noticed that you were in Shaker Heights and Pittsburgh before your current 16 years. So why don't you just share with us a little bit about, since you have some comparison, what do you really enjoy about our hometown, Hudson, Ohio?
Well, I grew up in a small farm town, so I love small towns. So the small town feel of Hudson. I love historic towns, historic houses. Shaker had that, but it was more from the 1920s as opposed to here. We lived in Pittsburgh I went to school and medical school in Pittsburgh. So I love the terrain of Pittsburgh, the hills. And this part of Ohio is more interesting in terms of the national park and the hills. Where I grew up, it was totally flat farmland, which I hated. Swore I'd never come back to Ohio, but
yeah,
a few
of us made that same job.
Yeah, he went to work for Ernst and Winnie, which became Ernst and Young, though he was in computer stuff, not accounting. Got it.
Speaking of your husband, I can't help but notice that you have had really a significant amount of trials and travesty in your life. You brought up your husband. It's my understanding that your husband passed from Lou Gehrig's disease. Is that right?
Correct. He was diagnosed in 2004, and in Shaker we lived in a big house with nothing on the first floor, no main bathroom or anything. And his family's from Pittsburgh, so we decided Hudson would be closer to Pittsburgh. And we found a 1-4 house here, which is not easy to find, actually.
Oh.
In Winston Manor, it was the only one there. So he was able to work for a whole year after he was diagnosed. And then it went kind of fast. So he had it about 3.5 years. So he stayed at home and able to get around in a wheelchair accessible minivan. the thing that I found really wonderful about Hudson, our neighbors were terrific. If I had a emergency, actually, I had a anesthesiologist that lived right across the street, that he came over a couple times to help out, and a couple of other neighbors did. And so that was one of the wonderful things that, I've appreciated about how people really can be very empathic and very helpful.
Sure. And, sadly, that really wasn't your only trial. When I learned that your daughter, Katie, also passed away as a result of an overdose. How old was she when that happened?
Yeah, actually, it wasn't an overdose. It was, she died
okay.
of suicide, but she was 21, and she was kind of the Florence Nightingale of the family. She took care of everybody but herself. It really started when she was a teenager. We tried all kinds of interventions to help her with the depression. But you never get over losing a child, because that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
One of the things that we found was, and again, I'm a doer, but I've working with a lot of families that have had grief too, is that if you can do something concrete, it can help you deal with the grief. And that's when we were up in Shaker, and the church we were with then went to Honduras on medical mission trips. And so we did that for, I did that for about three or 4 years. And it was very helpful, because you really got close to the people that went, and they helped support you in your grief. But you felt you did some good with that grief.
Sure.
Whether people do that, or if you plant a tree, we always had a special tree for Katie. Now she and my husband are up in Lakeview Cemetery, and we have a special tree for them up there. So those concrete things, whether you do that, or books with the library with their names in it, or things like that, it helps you feel like you're doing something to deal with the issues.
That's so. I do want to say that you do have the joy of a daughter and grandchildren in Hudson, I understand. And that's Meredith?
No, that's Emily.
Emily. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And Emily, and how many grandchildren do you have?
She has 3, and then her husband has a son from his first marriage. But his son lives with his mom. But grandkids have been wonderful. I think they've helped me get through a lot of hard times, but I have one that's 15, just finishing freshman year, a 6.5-year-old boy, and a 4-year-old girl. And they're within walking distance from where I live. So I'm always over there, or they're here. It was hard in the initial part of the pandemic, because it was like I would just talk to them through the glass door. But we've kind of all gotten through that okay.
We have about a minute and a half left. And so we are so happy to have you join us and be a member of our group. I will ask, was there something particularly about the Rotary that attracted you? You being a doer and involved in so many things, what was it about Rotary that attracted you?
Well, that you do have so many different projects, especially the medical project. I was always under the impression Rotary was for businessmen. So I was surprised when I talked to Dave Basil and found out that it wasn't. And I thought, oh, great, I can get in this. When I work with families, the same thing. It's what can you do to give parents the tools? I was part of a in-home program that was evidence-based for 20 years. And it was probably the most rewarding part of my career, was actually go to people's homes and give parents the tools. And I think the Rotary gives tools to the community on their different projects. And I'm really excited about being part of the medical project that you have.
Great. Well, fellow Rotarians, it was my pleasure to introduce to you to our newest member, Dr. Patricia Getz. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
And if you're like me, you're feeling like we have only seen the tip of the iceberg. Okay, well, this month, we're doing programs focused on history, And David Basil has been very busy reaching out within our own community and well beyond the state borders. So David, please introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, Marilyn. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Gwen Mayer. Gwen is the archivist at Hudson Library and Historical Society. In that role, she is responsible for a large manuscript collection, including one of the nation's largest collections of materials about famed abolitionist and Hudsonite John Brown. In addition to substantial holdings concerning our founding families of Hudson, such as the Hudsons, the collection also contains documents related to local organizations, such as the Garden Club and the Hudson League of Women Voters. Gwen has led many library walking tours to explore places and people of interest in Hudson, especially those involved in our nation's Civil War, from John Brown to the homes of many of the men who fought and homes in the Underground Railroad. Gwen has been with the library for 25 years. She has degrees from Kent State and the University of Pittsburgh. She resides in Garrettsville, collects REO speed wagons, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Gwen Mayer. Gwen, please take it away.
Thank you and good morning to everyone. I want to say a special congratulations to my fellow University of Pittsburgh grad, Patricia, as she joins Rotary. And a special thank you to Mimi Becker, who has known me literally since the age of about 6 or 7. I'm surprised you didn't have her introduce me because she could tell you quite a few tales. In my role at the Hudson Library and Historical Society, David mentioned that I'm responsible for the manuscript collection, the artifact collection, as well as local history and genealogy. This morning, you invited me to speak about Underground Railroad activities in our area, and it's my pleasure to unveil a new wonderful tool for all of us. But before I do that, I want to stress that this tour that we did, we dedicate to Jim Kakamo, and some of you may have remembered Jim. He was my predecessor. He started work at the age of 25 at the Hudson Library and Historical Society, and he passed away at the age of 50 about 16 years ago. Underground Railroad was truly his passion, and so as we redeveloped this Underground Railroad tour, we dedicated our efforts towards him. The tour features content, photographs. We've sort of enhanced it, put key documents and archival materials up online. This is accessible for all of you, anytime, anywhere, if you have a phone or a computer, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So if I share my screen, let me see if I can get there. All right, and I want to go to the library website. I want you all to look at this blue banner here, and where it says Historical Society, you're going to click on that. And as you walk, you come down the page, click on walking tours, and you'll see we have a virtual walking tour thanks to a recent pandemic. We did these in person, as you might know, for several years, and when the pandemic hit, we felt that we needed to provide the community an additional resource. So we are literally going to digitize all of our walking tours. The Underground Railroad and Anti-Slavery walking tour is by far the most popular, so that's where we started. And if you want to click on here or start tour, you'll see it. We did abbreviate these a little. We put 16 sites on, and I want you to be aware of the fact that there are about 30 sites in and around Hudson. And it starts literally at the green. You can access this on your phone, on a computer, or anything. I would stress to you that the text is different than the script. So you might want to take time to listen to the script. And of course, it starts at the green. If any of you were there in May of 2000, you will remember it was a very rainy day when we dedicated this site at the center of the green. And it honors the fact that Hudson was, quote, the citadel of abolitionism and a very active stop on the Underground Railroad. There were upwards of 20 Hudsonites mentioned on the backside of this. And I would encourage you all to go there and read it. Many of you might know that we had 2 station masters in Hudson, Owen Brown and John Markley, and each were responsible for the transportation of those people the fugitive slaves through Hudson. But I thought we would start here and sort of get, so you can all go back in a short 40 minutes that I have. I'm not going to sit and read this all, but I wanted you all to be aware that it was here. Let's see if we can move on to the next stop. Oh, next. You'll see we go to the Isham Beebe House or the Rectory of Christ Church Episcopal, and we talk a little bit about Reverend Warren Isham, who lived in that house, and it was built by Leander Starr. He also served as the editor of the local Hudson newspaper, the Observer and Telegraph, and he made our newspaper a little more abolitionist in its very nature. There were weekly columns that called for the immediate abolition of slavery, and Isham was an ardent colonizationalist. People don't necessarily understand or know that Hudson was a community, much as it is today, a community that was divided. And Mr. Isham was a colonizationalist. He was very much a member of the American Colonization Society, and they favored returning the fugitive slaves back to Africa in order to make a, quote, colony. So we featured that site. And if you want to go on to the next slide, you'll see there's a wonderful image of John Markley. He likely took this himself in 1860. He is the reason that we have a Markley cemetery. His mother was the first one buried there. He also served as the town clerk at one point, and he made coffins. He was an avid photographer and an early photographer in Hudson. His home, which we have images of, was where the current Windstream building is, and we know that there were fugitive slaves hidden there. He is also responsible for transporting people after the death of Owen Brown in 1856. He is the second station master. The next one is the Brown Strong House. The reason it's called the Brown Strong House was that Owen Brown built it for his son Oliver. And when Oliver was finished with this house, he sold it to Ephraim Strong, who was another prominent abolitionist. Both of them preached excessively in the Congregational Church, and Oliver attended an anti-slavery society and later moved to Geauga County. So we featured the Owen Brown House, or excuse me, the Owen, I'll get it yet, the Brown Strong House. Immediately next door is the Humphrey House on North Main Street. And Judge Van Rensselaer Humphrey was a renowned attorney, legislator, and judge for the Third Circuit here that sat, he was a judge for the Third Circuit Court, which encompassed Hudson. He built this home in 1833, and he also was a prominent Copperhead. He was very much involved in supporting the Copperhead or the Peace Democrat societies, and he was immediately opposed to his next door neighbor, the Browns, on the issue of fugitive slaves. He very much was against slavery, or excuse me, he was very much for slavery. And in 1863, he saw to it that there was a list of local Copperheads or Butternuts who were voters, and he included their list of names in our local newspaper. He also later in life sort of destroyed the Hudson printing press of our local newspaper. He was quite a hot-tempered man, I believe. So moving forward, we have, there's another picture of the Van Rensselaer house. Excuse me. We have David Hudson, and David Hudson was the founder of the American Colonization Society. We know that there were fugitive slaves hidden in his spring house immediately behind the house. He was an ardent anti-slavery person, but again, he was a colonizationalist. He founded Western Reserve College, which later became Western Reserve Academy, and his dying words were for his children to treat the college as if it were another child of his. He had very strong opinions about this community. He helped in the foundation of this community. David Hudson Jr. is one of the first-hand accounts who tells us 2 men came this evening in a sleigh bringing a Negro woman and a runaway slave and her 2 children. They all were hidden in the spring house immediately behind the David Hudson house. It's also the oldest structure built in 1806 in Summit County. Western Reserve College, which later becomes Western Reserve Academy. We also know that there were fugitive slaves here hidden. John Buss tells us that. And we know that they had an anti-slavery society just on the campus alone. They had two professors, Beriah Green and Elijah Wright Jr., who were very outspoken on the issue of slavery. Excuse me, I'm gonna cough here. And the college was in the midst of having quite a controversy over the issue of anti-slavery. The town was very divided. I think at Western Reserve Chapel, you'll see it's 135 College Street. We put a picture of Frederick Douglass because Frederick Douglass did indeed speak here on July 12th, 1854. He also visited with the Brown family. It is said that there were crowds of thousands, the largest gathering the town of Hudson had ever seen on a commencement day. His speech was very well received, and we know that he is one of the three pivotal people in the coming Civil War and anti-slavery battles that the country would foresee. Elijah Wright Jr. was one of the professors who taught at the academy. He was a professor of mathematics and natural history. He was also the founder of actuary tables for the United States and the world, essentially, and that's why he's called the father of American life insurance. But he was served also as the secretary of the American Anti-Slavery Society after he left Hudson. He was very vocal in his beliefs. Reverend Hansford's house was where Beriah Green lived, and he also was very outspoken. He actually would fail students because they had a disagreement over the issue of anti-slavery. And in fact, he taught sacred literature. He moves later to Oneida in New York and becomes very pivotal in the American anti-slavery societies. He was extremely vocal both in the church and within the community and college about the issues of anti-slavery. Harvey Coe was secretary of Western Reserve College, and we know that Laura Case had 4 daughters, actually, and Harvey Coe had 4 daughters. And Coe objected to Philo Wright courting his daughter Electra because of Wright's abolitionist views. According to Laura Case, young Mr. Wright did remain loyal to his convictions and married the minister's daughter notwithstanding. And it was for years they did not speak over this, which is kind of surprising. There is Harvey Coe. Here is Norman Baldwin's house. William Dawes lived there. Norman Baldwin built the house. He is the grandson of William Dawes that rode with Paul Revere. Dawes moves to Hudson in the 1820s, joins the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society, serves as a trustee for Oberlin, but more importantly, he goes to London for the International Anti-Slavery Society and raises money for the foundation of Oberlin College. Excuse me. I have a tickle in my throat this morning. Then there's Joseph Keeler. On May of 1820, Mr. Keeler and Rodolphus Edwards were set upon by a mob while transporting 2 men through our community. I don't know where it is on 91. We decided to say the South Green. I think it's more south than north, but I know it was on Route 91. Keeler was a slave catcher, and he had gone up to Independence and captured 2 African-American men and was returning to Virginia with these men. When he was in Hudson, a mob overtook him and freed the African-Americans. Mr. Keeler and Rodolphus were taken to Cleveland and faced a federal grand jury on the charges of kidnapping. And later, Keeler was fined $300 and the African-Americans were freed. It's quite something to have your community free African-Americans. My goodness, I get a tickle right at the wrong moment. Many of you know that there's a marker at the Congregational Church and Old Town Hall. And this marker signifies the fact that John Brown and other abolitionists were involved in our fight against slavery. All of us know about John Brown living in Hudson and his famous proclamation at the Oberlin Church on October 7th, 1842. This church is still the foundation of the building that resides at 5 East Streetsboro Street. Some of you know there's a marker on Maple Drive that signifies Abraham Lincoln's visit to Hudson, Ohio in 1861. It's my assertion that he could not speak too much about John Brown. There are additional sites that we use on this Underground Railroad, and there's also a map. And I would encourage you all to take time to look at this instead of listening to me cough. You'll see that the tour map, and you'll also see that there are sources cited. We cite them all, both from the papers and books, as well as periodicals and websites. And if you'll pardon me, I'm going to take a long swallow of water, and hopefully you'll have some questions. Let's see if I can get back to where we have questions. Do any of you have questions? You're all muted.
Gwen,
Yes.
Gwen, would you a little bit slower go through how you got to that site? I've been trying to get it on my phone and
Sure.
I'm not getting there.
Go to the library website, hudsonlibrary.org.
I'm there.
Okay, there's a blue banner across the top. You see it?
Nope.
Yes, you do.
I think you're on a phone. Are you? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Nope, I don't have a blue banner across the top. I get to all kinds of other things I can do, book sales, friends of the library, and all that stuff.
If you look across the top, there is a banner that says Morgan Foundation, Historical Society. I gotta back up. And what you want to do is click on the Historical Society and then click on walking tours. Do the rest of you see it?
It shows up on the computer, but it doesn't show up the way you're describing on a smartphone.
Okay.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Well, we'll renegotiate that a little, but I want you to be aware that it's all there, and I'll try and make it a little clearer on the
Well,
website.
there is one way to find it on an iPhone, and that is that there is a search feature. If you open the search feature and simply type in walking tours, it will take you directly to where you need to go.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great thing. How did the town government deal with the Underground Railroad activities?
Wow. That's the
That's
first
what
time
I
I've
mean.
ever been asked that.
She's jumping right in.
So when John Brown was hung in Virginia, now West Virginia, the town government actually got together while he was on trial and anticipated that the body would be returned to Hudson. And to my knowledge, that's about the only time the town really addressed John Brown specifically. They wanted to know what to do if thousands of people suddenly descended upon Hudson to see his body. Ultimately, his body was taken to New York and buried at his farm in New York. In terms of Underground Railroad activity, the town government really didn't interfere or intervene to my knowledge. Certainly there were a great number of town meetings and organizations where it was being discussed, the anti-slavery societies, the church, even at the Western Reserve College. But to my knowledge, it was never addressed in a governmental way.
James Field had a question. Was Hudson evenly divided on slavery, or was it primarily anti-slavery?
You know, Mr. Field, that's being hotly discussed lately. I believe that our community was much like it is today. I believe that there were people that had no idea what the solution was. I know that there were people that were very passionate about sending African Americans back to Liberia or back to Africa. Those were the colonizationalists. Mr. Humphrey and his crew were extremely passionate about slavery itself, and they felt that slavery was a good institution. So they were equally passionate. And then you had Owen Brown and the immediatists, the abolitionists, who were equally as passionate. I think there were a lot of people that cared a lot about the issue, and some that really didn't have a straight clue as to how to solve it. So I would tell you, I think we were divided, but we have been called a citadel of abolitionism in a local newspaper. So I hope that sort of answers you. I don't know, you know, how do you look back at thousands of people and determine, are you in this camp or that camp or this camp? Some people are not vocal or wanting to express how they felt.
Gwen, how large was the town at that point?
I knew you were going to ask me that. Oh, thankfully we have the United States Census. Hang on 2 seconds. I know that by the time of the Civil War, actually I pulled the wrong paper. By the time of the Civil War, we had 6,000 people roughly here in Hudson. When we were in our initial stages, there were just a couple of hundred during the 1820s and by the 1830s, it got up into the thousands. Underground Railroad activity started here earlier than it started in most communities. We were discussing Underground Railroad and anti-slavery in the 1830s, and most communities weren't doing it that early. I often say on the walking tour, Hudson knew an awful lot about the world in the 1830s. We knew where the Sandwich Islands were, which most people can't tell you today, and that would be Hawaii. During the 1830s and 40s, the Sandwich Islands and anti-slavery were equally getting headlines in our local newspaper. So I would tell you we were probably in the neighborhood of 1,000 or 2 at most during the time of anti-slavery and Underground Railroad activity here in Hudson, Ohio.
Gwen, I've got a question. This is Phil Tobin here. Gwen, is there any indication of the number of slaves that went through the Underground Railroad in Hudson during that period of time?
Well, Mr. Tobin, that's an interesting question. We can account for about 6 of them. If you ever go into Canada, there are areas where the African Americans were settled. There are 3 principal communities, and my REO Speedwagon conference happened to be in one of those communities a couple of years ago. So I went there and I looked at their Underground Railroad diaries and activities of people that had traveled to Canada on the Underground Railroad, and I looked for any mention of Hudson, Ohio. Unfortunately, I didn't find it. So if I had to go to court and swear on a Bible, I would say 5 or 6 we can absolutely prove 100%. I think the number is more like 40 or 50.
In total?
Yeah.
That's not a lot.
Keep in mind, it's an illegal activity. People didn't want to write about it. They didn't want to confess to it. They could have been fined for it. It's an underground secret activity. So there's not a lot of documentation. And Hudson is very fortunate in that we have 3 primary firsthand accounts.
Thank you.
Other questions?
What was the name of our newspaper then?
The Observer and Telegraph.
Was there only one?
Yes. And let me stop. At one time, it was the Hudson Observer and Telegraph, and they got frustrated and moved to Cleveland, and it became the Cleveland Observer and Telegraph. And then the daughter of the editor brought it back to Hudson, and it was the Hudson Observer and Telegraph again. We have had newspapers here from 1827 until today. There are very few periods that we don't have representation of a newspaper, principally the 1850s and 60s, unfortunately. Do I know stops up? Wait a minute. Do I know about stops to the north of Hudson, such as Hiram? Hiram is east of Hudson, northeast. Hiram is thought of, and I would defer to my friend. Give me a minute. Oh, David Anderson, who is the authority on Underground Railroad in that vicinity. And David will tell you that Hiram was more of a Baptist area, similar to Garrettsville. And there are thought to be 1 or 2 spots in Hiram, but it's not very well documented. Yes, Mimi. You have to unmute yourself.
I keep doing it on my name, and that's silly. My office was, when I was at Hiram College, was the oldest building on campus, and it was a stop. It had a dirt basement, and they had carved out ledges for sleeping rolls in the basement. But nobody in Hiram ever seemed to be very interested. And at the time I was there, it was before David had time to think about it. So I was just curious. And Hiram was, actually it was, they ran the Mormons out of town.
Yes.
They actually tarred and feathered them.
Yes.
So it was a really weird place
Yes.
during the time of, yeah. So I was curious.
Many of you know that Jim Kakama was passionate about Underground Railroad, and he is responsible for the initial research in this community. We had to look at every property and determine whether the property was standing during that time period. Then we had to look at the principal owners to see if they were vocal about their political beliefs with regard to slavery. Did they attend state conferences? Did they write letters to the editor? Were they active in the community? And we also had to look at the architecture of these buildings to determine if indeed they did have interesting places to harbor people, for lack of a better word, before we could actually document that that house was utilized or that structure was utilized in Underground Railroad activity.
Yeah.
Hudson is the 3rd highest community with the number of Underground Railroad activities in the state of Ohio. And in case you're wondering, if you're on a horse and you're in Hudson, does anybody know how long it takes to get to Cleveland?
No.
Probably 3 hours.
3.5 hours. And that's if you have a pretty average horse moving at a fair clip. So you're 3.5 hours are really away from freedom.
So I had a question, just more, not about Underground Railroad, but more about the archive files. One point I was trying to look up, and I found a copy of the Hudson Herald from the 1926, talking about building a new high school.
Yes.
But I gotta say, it took a lot of work to both, find it and scroll through and get to it. I don't know if there's any effort. I'm sure it would be probably pretty expensive and time intensive to put those files on a more easily accessible way to get to, or a researchable way to get to.
So James, you've encapsulated the struggles of all researchers. Microfilm is not really a fun thing to deal with. When you go to library school, they teach you that microfilm has the life expectancy of about 100 years. When we put something up digitally, it may have a life expectancy of a year or 2 with the constant change of technology. Remember, I have newspapers here from 1827 until today. First of all, you have to find a tool to access it all. So we have developed an index, and we're pretty much ahead of the curve with having an index to the complete run of the newspapers. And that index, by the way, is on the website further down. But second of all, in order to digitize those, it would be cost prohibitive. And right now I'm still trying to microfilm them all. We just sent out and had the 2000s microfilmed for the very first time. I can honestly say we have most of the newspapers from 1827 until today, the hard copy. However, in the teens and 20s, newspaper was made more of wood pulp, and they're very fragile and they kind of disintegrate. So keeping the old newspaper isn't always the best bet. Where right now keeping the microfilm still is. If I put a digital image up, it may or may not stay for 2 or 3 years. There's not a hard and fast technology that we really like yet. So right now it's still microfilm. We do selectively digitize excerpts of it and put them up, for example, in the walking tour. I would tell you all that the library has been very proactive about dealing with COVID. Thus, we're putting a virtual walking tour up, but currently the archives is still closed to the public. You have to make an appointment to come in here and see me, and you can only do it for a 2-hour period. You have to wear a mask, you have to wear gloves. The virus actually lives on older things a little longer. So we're kind of very proactive about protecting both the staff and the public. And we're very proud to say that nobody on staff at the Hudson Library has come down with the virus. And that's an amazing thing, given the fact that we have hundreds or thousands of people in and out of our door a day. Marilyn can tell you that every business has been affected by the virus, even the library.
Gwen, what is the most unusual thing that you have in the archive?
We have a lot of unusual things, Marilyn, but I'm very proud of the fact that we have a mammoth tusk. I think that's kind of unusual in Northeast Ohio. In fact, as far as I know, it's one of 3 in the state of Ohio. And many of you may know, if you've ever been upstairs, we have a tusk from a woolly mammoth that is about 16 to 20,000 years old that Lincoln Ellsworth gave us when he found as a polar explorer. So I would kind of tell you, I think that's unusual. It's not the strangest, but certainly it's unusual.
Well, you wear many hats at the library, besides just being the archivist. And one of the most interesting must be the search that you undertake in finding the authors for the author series that the library has continued to run. You have kept us busy almost 4 nights a week with the programming that you're putting on. And I want to thank you for that, because the authors are varied, a wide variety of topics that are presented. And what do you look for?
Wow. I've never been asked that one either, but I will. We look for topics that are interesting. You know, I always think that if I find an author that I would stay home for and get on Zoom, then I know that probably other people would as well. Certainly popular authors, and here's your hint for everybody that's sleeping or wants to know some inside scoop that nobody else knows. Do you all know that author named David Baldacci?
Yeah.
Has anybody read his books?
Sure.
He's coming virtually to the Hudson Library in coming months. And if that's not exciting enough, do you guys know that author named James Patterson? He wrote a book recently with President Clinton. He is arguably the top-selling author in the United States. In the coming months, he will come virtually to the Hudson Library. So I want you to look forward to those programs and sign up and attend them if you've got the time. We try to keep our author programs limited to just an hour, because I don't like to sit down longer than an hour. And if I'm like that, I can tend to believe nobody else does either. We look for professional credentials. You know, I look for people that have been to the university or have experienced what it is they're writing about. We look for a variety of topics. I don't want to just cover education. I want to cover history and the social issues and political issues and archaeology. I think there and some fiction, but Hudson is definitely a nonfiction town, and we hope that you enjoy the authors that we bring. And we're open to suggestions. So if you have a favorite author that you think would be good for a program, by all means, tell one of the circ clerks and they'll let me know.
Do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite?
Yeah, yes.
My favorite authors have all died. I will tell you in a little known secret, if an author comes to Hudson Library and Historical Society, they have become my friend. And I continue to have relationships with them long after they leave the Hudson Library. Tracy Chevalier emails me about weekly. Scott
Yes.
Simon from NPR still talks baseball with me, and he was here, I don't know, 16 years ago, 15 years ago when we opened this building, and he'll forever be a Chicago Cubs fan. I'm very happy to say that Mr. Gates, who was recently with us, the former Secretary of Defense, just emailed me last week, as did John Dean. You know, if they come to Hudson Library, they become my friend. And so people always want to see my Rolodex and, and, you know, are surprised that I can say so-and-so is my friend. But I maintain relationships with them all, which is often what brings them back to Hudson.
Actually, I was going to ask you, so I do rowing, and Daniel James Brown, who wrote
Yes.
The Boys in the Boat, is kind of
Phenomenal.
super famous in the rowing world because really no one else seems to write books about rowing. But, you know, I think he lives in California. So I'm curious as to how you were able to get him to come to Hudson. He was really good, too.
It's my understanding, James, that he's in the Pacific area. He's like in Oregon or Washington.
Or so, yeah, somewhere on the coast. Yeah.
And I begged, and I told him that he had the most interesting name that Hudson was very familiar with. And I wanted to know if he was related to John Brown. And that caught his attention. And because of that conversation, I sort of sweet talked him into coming to Hudson. He physically was here. He was a phenomenal author. And in fact, he has a new book out right now about the Japanese internments during World War II. I would encourage you to read. But I got him because of his last name.
Well, you do know that
Browns and Hudsons.
Hey Gwen, have you ever had James McBride?
Yes, we have.
You have?
James was an amazing individual, and he promised me that he would return to Hudson. He came when Good Lord Bird won the national book, which I believe was 2013, and he brought his band. And I'll never forget that there were people in the study rooms upstairs, and they were a little unnerved over the fact that the band was so loud that they could hear them in the study rooms. But he is a phenomenal individual, and I was a little miffed because he didn't come to Hudson to research John Brown before he wrote the book. So when I had him here, the very first place I took him was to the vault to see all the John Brown material, and he promised me he would return and use some of our manuscripts for a forthcoming book. I haven't seen him lately, but he promised he'd come back, and yes, we had him here. He would not let us film him, which is why I can't put it up on the web.
It was not a flattering portrait of John Brown.
No, but it was a humorous one.
It was.
Do you have other questions? What are you guys all reading?
Well, actually, James McBride, Deacon King Kong. Wonderful, wonderful book.
Yes.
Anyone else?
Mr. Williams, tell your wife that I'd love to see her again. And I just used her book yesterday.
I'm reading Adam Grant's Think Again. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't. I'm going to have to look at that one. Think Again?
Yeah. About understanding people who hold opposite opinions from you and how to be
Right.
empathetic and sympathetic with those opinions. And then in some places, how to change minds without being confrontational and adversarial.
Well, we all need to learn a little bit more about that these days.
Oh,
I
yeah.
will look into it.
What was the name of the author?
Adam Grant.
Grant. Okay, thanks.
I'm reading Connie Schultz's book about Erie Town.
Yes.
Yeah.
Connie was recently picked up as a USA Today correspondent. So you can find her columns in USA Today now.
Great. I loved her book about and his lovely wife.
Yes.
That was a great book.
She has come here before too and spoken. Well, if you all don't have other questions or comments, thank you for inviting me. I encourage you all to look at the walking tour, and remember, it's got both text and audio, and they're very different. So I would encourage the community as a whole, maybe they ought to look over it these days.
Well, Gwen, you indeed are a true asset to our community. I know people are attending our library virtual sessions from all over the United States because I share some of the more interesting links. And we've got my kids coming in from Denver, sister-in-law from Albany, another one from Lincoln, Nebraska. So our library is truly a 5-star, wonderful, wonderful place and an asset to our community. Thank you for sharing this morning. And
You're welcome.
It's always lovely to see you.
Gwen,
Thank you all.
I will pass along to my wife your comments and see if we can get her back down to the library.
Thank you. I love her.
Well,
I will tell you one quick footnote. Recently in the last month, we had an author, and we had over 580 people that tuned in for that specific author, which at this point has been our highest virtual author program.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Now, when you go back live, are you anticipating that you will be virtual as well? Or
We're
will you?
looking at hybrid systems, both virtual and in person, but with more limited numbers. It just seems a little daunting to squeeze people into that room.
Well, yes.
So we thought that since we are doing so well virtually, that we'd sort of have a mix so that people could tune in at home if they want or come into the building. But I think that we would limit the number of people in the physical library for programs.
Well, I understand that. Even before the pandemic, we were often using the overflow room.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, it's standing room only, sitting room only. I mean, what a wonderful problem to have.
Yes.
Well, when we close each of our weekly meetings with a look back in history. So we're going to take a look back today at some things involving libraries and books. In 1549, the Book of Common Prayer was adopted by the Church of England. In 1790, the first book copyrighted under our new Constitution was the Philadelphia Spelling Book. Also, in this day, in 1949, George Orwell published his seminal novel, 1984, set in the totalitarian state of Oceania. So there we go.
Marilyn, can I add one more?
Sure.
Today happens to be June 9th, 2021, right?
It is.
If you think about it, on June 16th, 2005, we opened the library, the new library.
Oh, gosh.
So we're very close to the anniversary of the new building. I believe 17 years ago. I don't do math well, but I well remember the day. So there's your last footnote for your special dates.
Thank you. I'd also like to remind everyone that this Saturday is the memorial service for our past president, Tom Page. Tom passed in October of last year from COVID. He was the honoree for our scholarship winners. We named our scholarships after Tom Page, a beloved member of our club and one of our past presidents. Tom was famous for running our fall fundraiser and a very integral part of our club. He was somebody who didn't know how to say no. And so this Saturday, there are calling hours at Johnson Romito, and the service will be at First Congregational starting at 3 p.m. So it was published in the Hub. Also in the Hub this last week, there was an excellent article that Jay put in about Rotary membership, getting us launched on our goal of attaining up to 72 members next year by July of 2022. We're closing out soon this Rotary year. And at this point, we're going to close this meeting and we'll come back in a few minutes with the board meeting. So thank you again, everyone, for attending, and wasn't Gwen Mayer just awesome? Thank you.